Hello, everyone. Um, I'd like to thank Ganat for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I see at least one, someone that I know, and the rest of you I'm pleased to meet for the first time. And welcome to everyone. Just by way of introduction, a little bit about my background. I'm kind of presuming that this is largely a macrobiotic audience. So, I started my involvement with macrobiotics back in 1980, kind of a long time ago. And I was professionally involved in macrobiotics for about 10 years. I worked 5 years at the Vega Macrobiotics Center, the resident school for macrobiotics of Herman and Cornelia Ihara. And I was the editor of Macrobiotics Today magazine for 9 years between 1992 and 2001. And after that, I went to Chinese medicine school. And I practiced traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and herbology for about 25 years, kind of in counting. And these days, the pandemic kind of pushed me into semi-retirement, not really retirement, I'm calling it a sabbatical. So I'm still sort of practicing Chinese medicine, but I've turned my attention to Ashtanga yoga. I had been a yoga practitioner for many years, and the pandemic gave me the opportunity to devote myself fully to that. So I started following a teacher that I had been aware of, and that kind of blossomed into a more dedicated practice. And to that extent, I'm now living in Portugal, where my yoga teacher is relocating to. He is American, but he's more popular in Europe, so he's relocating to Portugal, and that's why I'm here currently. So that's kind of where I've come from, kind of what I've been up to. And I think maybe what we'll do, if you're okay with this format, is I'll present kind of the ideas that I have, and then we can have kind of discussion or questions after, if that's okay. Okay, so having that said, you've maybe seen the title of this talk that I gave, rather grandiose, effective decision-making and the cure for everything. That's really just kind of a catchy title. There's no cure for everything, of course, but many of these ideas are derived from the combination of my macrobiotic experience and then my clinical experience as a Chinese medicine practitioner. So the macrobiotic portion is that I was inspired by non-credo idea, essentially, to don't take anything unless you see for yourself. That is, subject it to your sensibilities, your condition, your purpose, your dream, your mission in life. And if it resonates with that, then incorporate that. And if it doesn't, let it go and move on. So one day when I was working at the Vega Center, I was working in the publishing wing. And I was just walking down the hall, and out of nowhere, Herman Ihara appeared right in front of my face. And without any word of introduction or hello or any pleasantry, he just said, "What did you learn from reading Ohsawa?" Oh. So yeah, Herman was kind of like that, where he just kind of like drop out of the blue and give you a really ponderous kind of question. But really without thinking, and that without thinking is something that I often associate with coming maybe from the truest place, kind of unaltered by deliberative, logic and ego and all of those other factors. It's just like, ugh. And my response to that question was freedom. What I got from Ohsawa was freedom. That's what he was really hoping, trying to communicate all of his practices, his theories, his philosophies were directed at empowering individuals to experience freedom in their lives. And freedom, to me, kind of in like maybe the macrobiotic context particularly, is that many of us, when we came to macrobiotics, we probably first encountered something like the standard macrobiotic diet, which is great. It's a great place to start. A lot of information, very helpful, very useful, but it's so it's like one size fits all. And the movement toward freedom is to move from like the standard macrobiotic diet may be called like the path. To move from the path to a path that is something that is slightly modified from the original, that's a little more suited to personal conditions, and moving from a path to your path. That is what is specifically customized for your purposes, fulfillment of a dream, and really what that is day to day. Not that it gets decided in 1980 and it remains the same until 2022. It's something that evolves, but how can it evolve if you're not able to make effective decisions that prove to be constructive and valid and true for you? So that was the genesis of this effective decision-making idea, is that it's not enough just to graft a practice or a dogma or a philosophy onto your existing thinking. It has to be integrated and shaped so that it suits your specific personal needs or purposes. And we are all different from each other. We're as different from each other as our fingerprints. No two of us are alike. So theoretically then, no two macrobiotic diets per se would be the same. Some modifications would need to be made to accommodate all of the variables that make us up as an individual, from gender to age to ethnicity to location to season, and on to encompass all of the variables that make us up as an individual. So the objective that I'm going to use as an assumption is that one would like to experience good health and well-being, as a dream. But your life dream can be anything. It really can be anything. But we'll just take that as a general kind of dream that, for the sake of the discussion of these ideas that I'm going to present. And health and well-being, encompasses, as you probably all would know, both physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of life. And all of those dimensions, I believe, have to be addressed if good health and well-being is to be experienced. And the experience that I had from Chinese medicine as a clinician, working with hundreds of patients over the years, is that good health and well-being, at least in the Chinese medicine sense, means the harmonious flow of qi and blood, or the harmonious flow of substance and energy, however you'd like to think of that. And harmonious means that there's not an obstruction and there's not an acceleration. It's neither too fast or too slow. It's harmonious. It's smooth. And what I discovered in this clinical experience, I mean, I'd kind of been vaguely aware of it before that, but I saw it tangibly expressed in clinical experience, is that particularly in like middle-aged or even some elderly patients who had some kind of chronic intractable condition. That meaning something that they'd had for a long time that had been resistant to all manner of treatment and even medications and interventions and all the whole gamut of Western medicine treatments. And this is where I get the idea of the cause of everything, is that upon investigation, and this happened organically, it's not like I thought of it one day and then it became a method. It occurred over a number of years, is that I became aware that these patients who had this chronic intractable condition, there was something that was stuck, something that was not moving in this smoothly harmonious fashion, something that was stuck either in the physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual dimension of their being, that was impeding, or in some cases even blocking, the smooth flow of qi and blood, which in Chinese medicine then leads to some kind of symptom. The stuck energy will eventually impair some kind of physiological function that then is noticeable, undeniable really, and provides a portal or an avenue for investigation. So I came to view symptoms not as something that was necessarily wrong or bad, but more just information, guidance to discover or reveal where this stuck energy was, and then provide an opportunity for modification, or you might say healing, or the cure for everything. So the cause and the cure of everything is derived from this notion of something being stuck. So like in the physical realm, that can be, like a sore shoulder or low back pain. Or an example that I'm going to use was an elderly gentleman who'd had knee pain for decades. But it's not just the physical, is like kind of the last layer of manifestation. When I began to investigate, there was also something in the mental dimension, some kind of stuck thinking, some kind of rigid interpretation pattern that was unable to transform the stuckness. So it just remained in place. And after a while, something that's stuck, it becomes so familiar that it no longer gets attention as something that's out of the ordinary. We are amazingly adaptable to discomfort. We will allow it to exist with all manner of explanations, and but then too, there's also then the possibility of an emotional dimension, and that would typically be characterized by an unresolved emotional issue, sometimes a trauma, sometimes a very minor kind of issue, but if it's unresolved, it's representative of this kind of stuck energy. It's not being integrated, it's not moving forward, it just sort of remains there as a kind of blockage. It can also have a spiritual dimension to it, where there's either an absence of spiritual energy, or whether it's been somehow cast into doubt or questioned or traumatized by some kind of other belief system. The point being is that this stuck energy can be in any one of these layers: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. It can be in one or two, or it can be in all of them at the same time. So what would occur in these clinical settings was by questioning, usually just by questioning the big issues, you know, your like your diet, you know, your the big one, you know, your relationships, the primary relationships, spouses, children, parents, career, you know, did you love your job? Did you hate your job? You know, location, you know, kind of the big concerns of life. You know, that's where we would start. And invariably, as we proceeded through the conversation, something would come up. So the example I'm going to give was this. When I first met him, he was a 74-year-old male. And this was when I was living in the Cleveland area of Ohio. And this was a man who had grown up in a Catholic household, joined the Marines right out of high school, came back from military service and started working for General Motors, and worked his entire career for General Motors, raised 3 children, had been married to the same person all that time, but he had had chronic knee pain for a number of years, and he was at the place where he was facing potential knee replacement surgery. That was the only option that Western medicine was holding out for him. So in the process of getting to know him and about his life, we discovered a very significant feature of his childhood. And this is not uncommon after, you know, through all the experience that I had with patients, is that from a very early age, he would cite that whenever he displeased his mother, and it's important to emphasize displease, not that he did something wrong or bad or, you know, was in violation of some rule or anything like that. It's when he displeased his mother. More, and this has come out in a little bit, more a function of her worldview and her condition than his, but had a direct impact on him, close relationship and their interaction, and especially the impressionable nature of a young child. And this started occurring when he was only maybe 4 or 5 years old. Anyway, the situation was that whenever he did anything that displeased her, she would call him a dummy. Now, I've sort of edited that out. She would use like saltier language than that, which had a greater impact on him, especially as a young child. But the takeaway is that she was shaming, she was judging, she was criticizing, and in effect even punishing by that remark. And it was so prevalent and made such a deep impression on him, and this is how I picked up on it, is that when I met him, you know, like these 70 years later, whenever we'd get to some place in the discussion where he felt like he had made a mistake, he would refer to himself as a dummy. He would, you know, replay, you know, that tape from early childhood, and this is pretty common, that told him essentially, you know, he was not a good person, you know, he was not intelligent, you know, and a whole host of other sort of negative connotations that can accompany that kind of language. So that to me, you know, was his stuck spot. It had largely a mental and kind of emotional connotation initially, but it had over the years, as it came to be revealed, transformed into a physiological, contributed to the transformation of a physiological condition. And that is the development of this chronic knee pain. So that was, his stuck spot. I mean, the central features of my presentation today is essentially how to get unstuck. And that's where the effective decision-making plays a role. So using that example, what we did was we just started talking about the earliest experience that he could remember, like maybe the first time that he remembered being called a dummy. And I sort of walked him through what I'll describe in a little more detail of a decision-making process or a perception process of how to get at whether something is true for you or whether you can identify it as something that was externally imposed and possibly then being untrue, or at least not resonating, not feeling right, and leading to, that stuck sense. And what I use in terms of developing a decision-making process is a combination of computer technology and yin and yang theory. And that being that what I tried to do was to get a relatively kind of thorny and complex emotional psychological issue like this, and we'll call him, Bill, that Bill had, was to try to distill it, bring it down to where you've got two choices of how to interpret something. And there's all kinds of complexity kind of overshadowing it. But my belief is that any proposition can, at the very least, energetically be distilled down to one of two choices. And this is where the computer technology and the yin and yang theory played a role, in that in computer technology, at least my understanding, is that at its very fundamental level of electron movement, at a particular gate in the circuitry, it's either going to be a plus or a zero. That is, either the current's going to go through or it's not. So it's a forced choice proposition. It's either yay or nay, A or B. There's not really a third choice. I mean, someone once asked me, well, sometimes nothing happens, it just sits there. And that may be true, but that to me is a form of stagnation, when something is just static. I mean, that can play a role in some circumstances, but in terms of energy transformation, that's stagnation. Nothing's moving. The life force has been suppressed somehow. So distilling a proposition to an A or a B, and then the yin-yang theory is like the Tai Chi that you all know, kind of the circular symbol, half black, half white, with a white dot in the black portion and a black dot in the white portion. You know what I mean? And that is that there's never anything that's exactly 50-50. Yin and yang are always in transformation. It's never 50% yang, 50% yin. It's always some preponderance, they like to say, because it's always transforming. The 50-50 is another way of thinking of stagnation. It's just stuck, it's just sitting there. But if it's always moving, then there's always some greater or lesser degree of yin and yang. So these two ideas put together is that any proposition that you face is not going to be exactly 50-50. That is, it's not going to paralyze you with the equality of the choices. There's going to be some preponderance, and this is an energetic axiom of yin and yang theory. There's going to be some preponderance of one or the other. So you take that and put it together with, distilling a proposition down to A and B. Either A or B is going to be, greater or less. It's never going to be A and B are equal. At least this is the theory as it goes. So that's kind of the backdrop of the kind of decision-making kind of theory. And then, adding a couple of qualities that are certainly helpful, if not essential, to decision-making. And one is something I call discernment. That is being able to notice differences, to see subtlety, to experience subtlety, to know what the specific qualities are that you're dealing with. And for discernment to be present, there has to be clarity of mind. You have to have a clear, if your mind is cluttered or if it's cloudy or veiled, then chances are it's going to be difficult to make an effective decision. And another feature that the clarity, I think, requires is good memory, which is a quality that Ohsawa frequently cited, that good memory essentially means that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You had an experience, you learned from it, you can recall that and apply it to a new circumstance effectively. You don't have to go through all of the decision-making process. Again, something is true, let's say. So the process then, after discovering what this stuck spot is, in this case, being called a dummy, is how do we bring that to a place where it's just going to be A or B and how to interpret that? Well, you've only got two choices. And I should add another feature in addition to that permeates discernment, certainly, is the clear perception of energy, feeling, and one's own sense of truth. That is, does something resonate with you or not? It doesn't have to be an objective sense of truth that's recognized by everyone. It's only what I call your personal truth. Because what resonates with you is very likely to be something positive and constructive. Maybe not always, but generally speaking. So with those two choices, well, let's return to the example with Bill and his chronic knee pain and being called a dummy as kind of his stuck spot. So we went back to his earliest memory, and he told me what the situation was, and I can't really remember what it was. But the leading question then, now that he's 74 years old, and I have to add that we didn't get to this place until I'd been working with him for probably almost a year or a year and a half. And this would be true of most patients, because it would take that long to stabilize their physiology with good diet and good health practices, so that discernment and clarity had the opportunity to be exercised. And that is kind of a prerequisite. But I'm assuming that most of you folks have probably gone through all of that. So we'll just move right ahead to how to work with A and B. So early experience when you were called a dummy, Bill. Think back, you thought he could recall it. He did have good memory by this time. And the leading question to him then is, did that feel right? Did that feel true? Did you actually do something that warranted you being called a dummy? And this happened with many patients. At this point, they're usually taken aback because we've touched upon something, a pattern that has been present in this case for many, many years. So long that it was so deeply imprinted that it was nearly beyond the reach of conscious recall and modification. But to carry him back, and this is kind of like pseudo-psychotherapy in a way, to take him back to that moment when he was called a dummy and he could, go back to that 8 or 10-year-old or whenever it was experience with his 74-year-old experience and intelligence and clarity, he could reinterpret the experience of that moment. And, as the example proceeds, he would say, yeah, I don't remember doing anything bad. She just called me a dummy because, I, pushed my chair away from the table. It could be anything. Because where we eventually got to is that his mother had kind of a frustrating and bitter life experience, and she unloaded her pain onto her children via this kind of safety valve release of criticizing and kind of dumping on them that would temporarily relieve, her frustration and her pain, but transferred, it to the children. And so when he had that realization, he sat back and I could just see this wave of an entire life of how he had thought of himself coming up for reevaluation. And the beauty of accessing, and I would call something like this, accessing the energetic dimension of someone's being, in this case, the emotional dimension. And to me, one of the qualities of the energetic dimension is that it is not bound by time and space. That is, energetically, you can go back to when you were a 10-year-old, change an interpretation, and it retroactively changes all of the experiences subsequent to that. So it's not like it's fixed in stone or carved in granite. Any energetic experience can be modified at any time or space, and it will affect everything else that happens subsequent to it. And so then, once he had that realization, I could go further with getting him to connect with a physical component of it. Not quite yet the knee pain, but I found that in discovering these stuck spots, there was usually an associated physiological sensation. Something like, you get a knot in your stomach, or, you get a little, pressure in your temples, or, you grab the place between, there's some kind of physiological manifestation of that energetic pattern that can key you into the nature of its energy. So we did that. And, for him, I think it was like, I remember like furrowing my brow or something like that. So I said, okay, in that moment, when you were furrowing your brow after your mother had called you a dummy, did that feel like a sense of constraint? Or did it feel like a sense of flow? I mean, it's kind of an obvious, loaded and kind of obvious question. The furrowed brow, it calls to mind a sense of constraint or compression. So he said, yeah, it felt like constraint. I was confused. I didn't know what to think. She said I was a dummy. I couldn't understand why. So I'm in a state of confusion, which is then going to be a stuck spot. So furthermore, a stuck spot experience like he had can also be further interpreted as to whether it's going to be nourishing or depleting. The constraint will be depleting. Constraint is constricting the free flow of qi and blood, or the free flow of energy. So it's throttling, the life force, which eventually is going to lead to some kind of dysfunction or malfunction that will lead to the development of a symptom. So he said, yeah, it felt depleted, and you can see it's oftentimes in someone's posture. When he said, it felt like constraint and it felt like depletion, his shoulders would slump. And very likely that was the posture that he would have when he was subjected to that treatment by his mother. So this then is the kind of pattern, or the key points to effective decision making. And that is, identifying a stuck spot, something that is not free flowing, that's not transforming, distilling it down to a choice of A or B, recognizing, which of those choices is flow and nourishing, and then having the courage in many cases to choose the flow choice. So in Bill's case, choosing to override the validity that he had attributed to his mother's comments was overturning kind of a lifetime of validation that he had ascribed, or he had allowed his mother to have. And that's no small feat, to confront a beloved and longstanding authority figure and to defy, what they have delivered to you as some kind of truth is a formidable task. There's a lot of emotional and psychic energy that has to be transformed there. But once you have this kind of almost like flow chart of looking at decisions or at propositions, you can break it down into smaller increments so that the emotional and psychic impact is softened. You're just making sort of incremental determinations. So, the flow choice in Bill's case was, I'm not a dummy, or that comment was not true. That was my mother's suffering. It was not mine. So then, once you've gotten to that place, that informs all of the other incidences where you had that kind of feeling. And it's not just, with the recollection of the moments when your mother called you a dummy. It can be extended to any proposition where you feel that sense of stuck energy. And this is where I got the notion that the stuck energy is the cause of everything, because its origin is usually it's in kind of the subtle energetic dimension where, when we're young, or many of us don't develop it until later in life, we're just not aware, or we don't ascribe any validity to the impressions or the sense that we get from those moments. So we just push it down, we suppress it. And in Chinese medicine theory, that's creating a distortion of that smooth flow of qi and blood that eventually is going to manifest as something physiological. And that's the view of symptoms in Chinese medicine. It's a deeper disharmony that has existed long enough that it has compromised some kind of physiological function. And I think that's why in many cases, it doesn't show up until midlife for a lot of people. we have such exuberant energy in our youth that we can afford to suppress it and just carry it around. And it doesn't seem to palpably interfere with our functioning. But as we age, and our reserves diminish and the accumulation of those stuck energy experiences accumulate, then it can be transformed into a physiological condition that we can no longer ignore. And punctuated in Bill's case by he was facing knee replacement surgery. So, kind of the happy ending to that story, and I think the illustration of the role that effective decision-making can have is that, and I continued to work with Bill for years after that. He's still kind of an active patient. I still talk to him every few months. But we started there, and then we went into his relationship with his wife and relationship with his kids and his history at General Motors, his years in the Marines, all of which contained examples of this stuck kind of energy that had contributed to the development of his physiological condition. So, one decision, yeah, maybe not such a big deal, but it's the cumulative effect over a long period of time that tells the tale. And it's the cumulative effect over time that results in either, kind of a depleting, deteriorating health and well-being sense, or an ever kind of vibrant, robust, healthy sense of health and well-being. And delivers then, the kind of life experience that one has overall. Is it going to be, kind of good health or poor health? Is it going to be frustration, or is it going to be fulfillment? Or is it going to be, peace? Or is it going to be kind of maybe vague, but just unremitting kind of anxiety or agitation? So, my experience clinically was that rather than, I always addressed symptoms, and you can treat symptoms and make them better in short term. But the real cure was discovering and revealing what was stuck in somebody's, we'll just call it energy sphere. Because it's from that point that, the rest of their life would kind of animate from, kind of the trajectory that it would take. So, I've steadfastly tried to avoid getting embroiled in any of the, kind of passing, macrobiotic debates about this diet or that diet or this food or that food or, whatever. And not really kind of teach or counsel to that point, but teach or counsel to this notion of how to make effective decisions that serve, your dream or your purpose in life, which to me was really the central message of Ohsawa's work, was to liberate us from these influences that pulled us off of our path and would land us in a path, or worse yet, the path, where you have to compromise so much of your own truth to be able to stay on the path that, not to too fine a point on it, is likely to eventually make you sick somehow, or physically impair you somehow. Whereas to stabilize the physiology, which the standard macrobiotic diet initially is pretty effective at doing, but then making modifications to further evolve, one's own sense of well-being and dream and purpose in life. It maximizes the energetic potential that each of us has. It sort of releases it to circulation rather than keeping it suppressed or stuck or impeded or impaired. And at least one avenue, through all of that is this sort of theory or this practice of effective decision-making, which to me is really just kind of a mechanism of consciousness raising. raising one's consciousness to become aware of how your life experiences have influenced you and where those experiences came from and what was the nature of the source of those experiences. Did it come from a reliable, valid source, or was it from an unbalanced or distorted source, in which case maybe they need to be reevaluated. And to be perfectly honest, we've all got stuff like this, myself included. And I've got a long story about a physical health concern that I had that I won't share with you at the moment because we don't have time, but I've seen it both in practice, in personal experience, and I think it's a sound kind of theoretical approach if it resonates, with you. So I think that's really all I have to say in terms of kind of the content of what I wanted to present to you all. So if you have questions or concerns, we could turn to that, or if Ganesh, you have some other suggestion, we could do that.
Okay, so first I'll invite any friends who would like to ask a question or find out more. Amanda, if you're here, I imagine you're pretty interested in these topics, or anybody.
Pardon, Gunette?
No, I just thought that you might have been appreciating this talks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to meet you, Robert. Bob, I'm sorry I haven't come across you before, but I do have a question. Is that okay, Gunette?
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm just curious. You said you do Chinese medicine. Do you do acupuncture or just with herbs?
I do both. I do. Well, my practice of acupuncture or Chinese medicine really became a hybrid, kind of an example of modifying it to, my personal, what personally resonated. I started off initially just doing kind of straight up acupuncture and herbs, doing symptomatic treatments. But very quickly, I incorporated dietary and lifestyle education, which mostly was derived from my macrobiotic experience. And then eventually, evolved into this kind of spiritual counseling, psycho-spiritual counseling, I would call it. And that initially I would see patients 1 hour at a time, but eventually I started seeing them 2 hours at a time.
Right.
And in that 2 hours, we would spend anywhere from 40 minutes to 1 hour and 15 minutes in discussion. And that's what led to the revealing of stuck spots, like in the example of Bill, learning more about their lives, their relationships, the details, the influences, and then applying the Chinese medicine modalities to further consolidate whatever had come up, but also then to just physically, like I treated Bill's knee from the very beginning, and he would get relief, but usually by the next appointment, 2 weeks later, the pain would come back. It wasn't until that he improved his diet and lifestyle choices and eventually delved into kind of where the stuck spot was, that the interval longer and longer till eventually, it went away unless there was a triggering, emotional experience. And he'd have an argument with his wife or something like that, then it would usually come back.
So I'm curious because you said that you considered it a prerequisite that people sort of like resolve some lifestyle, diet, and so on habits for at least a year and a half before you start working into their stuck place. I'm just curious because with presumably you do diagnosis, so I'm just wondering why you need to wait that long to be able to start working into the emotional stuck meridians.
Well, a lot of it had to do just with clarity. I mean, I was working with people in the Cleveland area who, were lifelong, junk food eaters, meat eaters, heavy sugar eaters, alcohol consumers. They were fairly toxic. And my observation was it was rare for, clear thinking to be present when those lifestyle habits were still prominent. So this kind of investigation requires, self-reflection and a kind of transparency to, deeper layers of life experience. And I mean, there weren't very many. I mean, almost all of my patients were by referral from people who'd already seen me, but I would get occasionally, someone who had seen my name somewhere and it was kind of a cold call. And I would come in and I would kind of describe this, even just the dietary and lifestyle stuff, and they just walk out, it just wasn't for them. So there's a kind of readiness, for someone to explore, these kinds of dimensions. And even in those who have the readiness, until they've kind of, I guess you could say, removed the obstructions of, physiological constraint, which can be the product of certain dietary and lifestyle patterns. They might intellectually be able to relate to it, but they couldn't make the transformative, deeper layer transformations, is my experience.
Interesting. So, I mean, I find with a lot of clients who are very addicted to their lifestyle habits, comfort eating, their pizzas and bagels and whatever, unless I work through into the emotional body, they don't have the capacity to, by willpower alone, change their diet and lifestyle habits. So I'm just interested how you worked with only the people that already had that readiness to do that?
Well, the kind of one of the gatekeepers is to provide a patient with a positive experience early on so that you gain their trust. And that can usually be done by, a palliative treatment of relief of whatever the symptom is. Like in Bill's case, first treatment, his knee pain got better. So that then predisposes someone to at least consider what you have to say. So establishing that rapport by way of a positive experience was the way to kind of get the whole process started. And then it would vary. Some people could jump in right away, but other people it would take longer. I had another female patient, very high-powered individual. She was a bank president, ran the Boston Marathon. She was in her late 40s, hard-charging career person, 2 kids, married, to like super person, and had a chronic ankle injury from running. And I didn't even learn until about 6 months into treating her ankle that she was also an alcoholic. She didn't feel comfortable revealing that until a certain degree of trust was established. So even only then did she begin to accept some of the ideas that I presented, even about diet, seriously. So just generalizing, there's variety across the spectrum, of course, and there's, like anything, there's no fixed way that things proceed, but these are just some examples of my experience.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And Maya?
Oh, hi. Thank you. That was lovely. Lovely to hear you. I have lots of questions. Most of them you have answered by now. Like, how did you on what way did you treat these men? But you said the ways you do your treatments. Then also, I wanted to ask about choices. You were saying about choices, but I'm thinking about choices. Sometimes we get stuck in some kind of situations because of choices we made maybe before in our earlier life, and then we are stuck in some kind of a situation that maybe it will take time to get out of that situation. I mean, I don't know. Parents we had, that's a choice I didn't make, but now I have a mom who is disabled, and I have a choice to make to look after her or not to look after her, and it's a choice I'm making. or spouses we chose. And then by the time we get awareness and to bring that to kind of clean the mess we made when we weren't aware, it will take some time. And if you can elaborate on that. And the last thing that I want to ask about addicts. I'm a food addict. I go to 12-step program. And in our 12-step program, they teach us that addicts have very short-lived memory. We don't remember the pain it brought by the addiction. We forget very quickly. I mean, we are in so much pain. And then whenever next day, I will just choose the wrong food again. Even in macrobiotics, I will choose the wrong foods, you know? That will keep me overweight.
Yeah.
So if you can, you know,
Sure.
also share some thoughts.
Your first question, and this would come up a lot, where the stuck spot was in a relationship or a situation that it was just not possible to change. Like, you know, Bill was never going to, I mean, he had a similar relationship with his wife. You know, she also kind of criticized him a lot, but he was never going to leave her. He's never going to divorce her. And in such situations where the situation can't be changed, what you always have available to you is how you relate to the situation. I mean, that's almost not kind of a cliche, but it's that shift in interpretation that is so important in changing the energetic pattern. Like, you know, you can care for your mother and you can be around her, even though maybe she used to irritate you or whatever that was. But you can, in yoga circles, we call like, or Buddhist circles, it's like evoking compassion. You know, that you understand why someone is the way they are, or at least you have an interpretation of it. So it gives you a means of relating to them that does not feel depleting to you. Like, you don't have to take their words personally. Like in Bill's case, I even suggested that he go to his mother's grave and speak to her, like speak to her spirit and explain, you know, his new understanding and, you know, like open up this kind of, you know, energetic dialogue. And, you know, he found that to be useful, you know, to go there and speak to the headstone would have been kind of a stand-in for going back to when he was 10 years old and speaking up at that time. So there's that. With addiction, you know, I found that the acupuncture can be very helpful in addressing addiction concerns. There's a specific protocol in acupuncture for addressing addiction, alcoholism, appetite control, stop smoking. It has to do with points in the ear. And you may be able to find a practitioner in your area who could help you with that. The effect is that it will reduce the cravings. It has a deeply calming effect. Generally will last anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. And it lasts longer with subsequent treatment. That is, the effect is cumulative. The more treatments you have, the longer the effect may last. And I found that in conjunction, I mean, you probably already know about, you know, what a healthy diet would be for you. So you've got that information. You just need to get over that moment when the cravings are overpowering and make a different choice. So I found that acupuncture, and I mean, I've used it. I went to a 2-week training program in Portland, Oregon, you know, many years ago, specifically for, you know, this purpose. And as part of the training program, we went out into, it was a county-wide program. We went out into these satellite facilities that would take addicts and alcoholics off the street at 8 o'clock every morning. And they had just had their last fix, their last drink, whatever. And they'd come into the room and they'd be loud and they'd be falling off of chairs. And, you know, and the very first thing they would do would be, it's 5 needles, it's 5 points in the ear. They'd put these points in, and 5 minutes later, the whole room would just go silent. I was amazed. It was like a graphic illustration of how effective it was. So that's what I would recommend as far as addiction issues.
Oh, Bob?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I understand acupuncture is much stronger than acupressure, but can one do it to oneself? One add the pressure to the ear?
You can, you can.
Clara and Bob, just one moment. I just want to interrupt with a question that came before yours, Clara, if you don't mind, from
Sure.
Carol.
Yeah.
So Carol writes,
I can say
excellent
it.
presentation. Oh, there you go. Hi, Carol.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. Excellent. I
Can we
put in
see
the
you, Carol?
chat.
And
can you
also
hear
I
me?
want to, we can't see you. Also, I just
That's-
want to mention to anybody who needs to take a break, do it now. Don't be shy. Because
Okay.
generally we try to stop about this time and give a little break before the next presentation. So go ahead, Carol, and anybody who needs
Yes,
a break,
Thank
please
you.
do.
So I'm 76 and I'm going through major downsizing to really get rid of stuff, kind of, projecting ahead so the kids don't have to get a dumpster. And it's really challenging. And I do go to acupuncture and I have the basic macrobiotic, background, but I will ask for those points that you mentioned because it's really challenging and very, very stressful to let go. And I just wanted to know if you had any suggestions. And I have therapy, but still, you have to just get in there and dig this stuff out and clean out file cabinets. And if you have any supportive macrobiotic meals and foods that you might recommend, thank you so much. Oh, challenging.
Well, try to be consistent here.
Yes.
The macrobiotic foods and meals that are going to be most helpful to you are those that you decide are most helpful to you. You know much better than any counselor or teacher or book, because only you live inside your body, mind, spirit, and emotional body. So another feature of the decision making, maybe that I didn't emphasize enough, is the role of intuition. And intuition is nothing more than kind of what feels right. And what I got from George Ohsawa and macrobiotics is that, yeah, there's this information, but it's really a process of informed trial and error. You got this information, you've got this macrobiotic diet, well, then try it. If something works, retain it. If it doesn't work, let it go, try something else. And by degrees and over time, you arrive at the practice that's appropriate for you for whatever you're going through. And you have developed this facility to continue to evolve it as you go through stages of life or through different changes like downsizing that will support you in that process. So rather than give you specific recommendations, I would really refer you to cultivating your own sense of intuition and decision-making, and trust that.
Thank you so much.
I would say, I do have a book out there. I mean, if you want some kind of specific information, I have a book. It's called Macrobiotics Revisited. It's available on Amazon. It's published by the George Ohsawa Macrobiotic Foundation. It's got sort of my view of how to make a macrobiotic practice work for you. You could start there too.
And Clara, a quick one.
Would acupressure, doing it to yourself, would that work also?
Well, yes, and there's a version of that. If you went to a practitioner and had those points done, you could ask them to put in, they're called seeds or pellets on the points. And then when you press them, you get a similar effect to the acupuncture treatment. And they'll stay in for a week or more, and you can get them reinserted. That's one of the ways that you can sort of self-administer that kind of treatment.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well then, Bob, it remains only for me to thank you, which I do with great appreciation and admiration. You really presented it very clearly and easily for us to follow. I wish you well in Portugal. I hope you learn the language.
Yeah, that's my next task.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for your attention.
Just wanted to ask how long you will be in Portugal for.
Well, at the moment, sort of indefinitely.
All right, because I'm in London, so Portugal is not too far.
Yeah, I have a resident visa permit, which is good for 2 years, renewable up to 5. But so everything is contingent at the moment on what transpires with my yoga teacher. But so far, I've been here 5 months. I like Portugal a lot, so I'm gonna stay.
Very good. Bye bye. Bye bye. See you.